Art, would you like to make a comment? Yes. Let me give you this microphone here. Here you go.
Some of you know that I spend quite a bit of time visiting pastors all over, and I just wanted to let you know that your pastor here, Pastor Hope, is one of the finest pastors I've ever met. And he has good knowledge of science and nature, and he's able to explain it to people. If he's not, he knows where to direct you to get the right answer. But I just want to comment of all the pastors I know, he's the finest.
Thank you, Art. Thanks very much, Art. Very fine words, and I certainly agree. The folks in the sound booth, there we go. All right, we got sound now? Great, okay. Well, that was a local announcement anyway, so let me see, let me bring this up. I'm gonna do this for just a second so that I can do this up here. There should be a way to make all this happen a little bit smoother, but it's software. Okay, here we go. With any luck, Corey, that's going to give us our video feedback in just a second. That's an interesting diagram. There we go. All right, good. So, welcome to the June 2023 meeting of Reasons to Believe here in Brooksville, Florida. My name is Gary Hamor, and I am the local chapter leader for this chapter of our organization. And tonight, I'm going to chat on the topic of what everybody ought to know about artificial intelligence, which I'll abbreviate as AI, just to keep it short and we can get through the evening. I do have a lot of slides tonight. I'm going to go kind of quickly, and my challenge in this presentation has been to make this very technical topic, certain aspects of it, very technical, accessible to everybody. I've looked at lots and lots of YouTube videos looking for the simplest explanations that I could just grab and put up on the screen and share with you. I couldn't find any. They're all just, pretty heady stuff. So I'm going to do my best. Now, here's the key. If Pastor David were here, he would tell you it's not important that you remember everything that's said. It's not important that you remember 50% of what's been said. Try to grab on to one or two things that you can take with you tonight about the topic. And if you succeed at grabbing a couple of things about this topic that you didn't know when you came here just a few moments ago, then we all would have done our job well, okay? So let's kind of jump right into it. I always like starting my meetings with that picture that comes off the James Webb Space Telescope.
Could you give us a little of your background?
Oh, okay, sure. Bob asked me to tell you about myself. My name is Gary Hamor, and I am from Boston originally. Left when I was 18, never turned back, never wanted to live anyplace else. We came from 40 years of being in Colorado up to 2 years ago when we moved here. And so I consider myself more of a Coloradan than I do a Bostonian. But I will say this, when I go back east, I can park my car and have it down and talk 80 miles an hour like those people right there. Because if I don't talk like that, they're not going to understand a word I'm saying. Do you follow that? My degree is in computer science from the U.S. Air Force Academy. It took 192 and a half semester hours of schooling in a 4-year program. And I filled most of those electives with computer science. In fact, they ran out of courses for me to take. They started inventing courses for me, independent study courses, and then they said, oh, just make up your own. And so I made up my own courses and I kind of got sideways into computers. I really loved it. So I know a little bit about the topic that we'll be sharing tonight. Is there anything else you want me to tell you about myself, Bob? Okay, good. All right, so let me kind of jump right into it here. I hope. I'm going to jump right into it. Okay, here we go. I might have to do this. Here we go. What everyone should know about artificial intelligence. Well, as a person named Jordan Peterson, do you all follow Jordan Peterson at all? Anybody? Do you know who he is? Pretty smart guy, right? Pretty smart guy. He says, the bigger the toy, the smarter you better be to use it. And another thing that he said was this. He said, sorry. All right, there we go. Giants are going to walk the earth once more, and we're going to live through that. Maybe. And so I'm going to hopefully explain to you why there's a little bit of a conditional around that. In order to understand artificial intelligence, I think it's necessary to first understand a little bit about software engineering. And so I'm not going to turn you into computer scientists, but I'm going to give you enough information that if you know nothing about computer programming, you're going to at least get some exposure to it tonight. The goal of conventional programming is to automate tasks that are explainable as a set of step-by-step instructions. In other words, this is a procedural focus. Okay? Traditional software takes a procedural focus. But in artificial intelligence, the main goal of AI has been to develop programs that make intelligent decisions and solve real-world problems, possibly dealing with very messy input data that could make it difficult to handle using a procedural approach. Okay? Does that make sense? In other words, AI programming focuses on the what, and procedural programming focuses on the how. Okay? So that's a little different. And I'm going to get into that. Are all of you up to speed on your Terminator movies? So this is what it says down there in the fine print. Over 350 executives, researchers, and engineers from top businesses have signed an open letter warning the world that the AI technology they are building may be a threat to humanity's existence. That would be called an existential threat. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Okay? So this is a pretty serious topic. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to define some terms, and I'm going to let you know what artificial intelligence actually is. Come on in, Jim and Linda. And why AI is a different kind of software. What are some of today's AI capabilities? And what is the AI singularity? This is what most people are very, very concerned about. And then other things that we ought to be all concerned about, okay? So let's start with a definition of terms. Can you guys see that okay? Is it clear enough? Can you read it? Or is it still an eye chart? Can we dim maybe the front lights a little bit, Corey? Yeah, thank you. Does that help? More? One more row, Corey? Yeah, let's take them off. There, how's that? And can you still see me on the YOLO Live? I know you folks can. We're actually capturing all this on camera. Okay, so artificial intelligence is represented by this outer circle, and it includes these two topics called machine learning and deep learning, okay? Artificial intelligence is a technique which enables machines to mimic human behavior. Machine learning is a subset of AI which use statistical methods to enable machines to improve with experience. Machines learn. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning which makes computation of multi-layer neural networks feasible. How many know what a neural network is? How many have heard of neural networks? You've heard somebody mention them. Okay, I'm going to show you some neural networks tonight, just to give you an idea. Okay, let me do this, and okay, so what is artificial intelligence? Well, let's take a look. The accumulation of information, analyzing it, and projecting it to serve any given moment. In other words, it's software that learns. AI is declarative rather than procedural. That's kind of what we talked about before, okay? AI systems, especially those based on machine learning, include language models such as ChatGPT. These are declarative in nature. This means that instead of explicitly programming the steps to solve a problem, AI systems are trained to learn from data and make inferences based on patterns and examples. They learn to represent knowledge and make decisions based on that knowledge. Okay? Fundamentally different than computers that just do math and have a whole bunch of if, then, else statements to decide what the next output should be. Okay? AI software can generalize and create innovative answers, and non-AI software is specific to a set of known conditions. That is, it's procedural. So in other words, if I were to sit down and want to write a program that, for example, if I assume that I'm going to put in some number of sides of a polygon, multi-sided figure, and all sides are equal in length, if I put in 3 sides, what would I get out of that? A triangle. And if all the sides were of equal length and I put in 4 sides, what would I get? A square, right? Okay, so on and so forth. Okay, so what I did was I made a simple flow chart that, hopefully you can see that is the flow chart for the program that I wrote. I fired up the Python programming language, and I decided to let's get a number from the user. So the user enters a number. These little triangle boxes are decisions, okay? And the things that look like paper are outputs, okay? And the terminal down here is the end of the program. So let's start the process. The user enters something on the keyboard, and it's the number of sides. So if the number of sides is less than 3, then the output from the program is error. A polygon must have at least 3 sides, right? You can't have an enclosed figure with just 2 sides, right? Okay, so that's pretty clear. And then the program ends. If the sides is greater than 5, then the program's going to say, I don't know what that is. I just decided to make it say that. It could have said anything. It says it's greater than 5 sides. It's some kind of a polygon. I don't know what it is. But here we get into the meat of it. If the sides is equal to 3, we're going to say it's a triangle. If the sides is equal to 4, we're going to say it's a square. If it's equal to 5, we're going to say it's a pentagon. And then the flow, the logic flow, comes over here and ends in each one of those cases. Does that flow chart kind of make sense, what we're doing? Okay, so let me show you the program. This is the program that does that. And this is, again, is written in Python, okay? So we just say sides is equal to keyboard input, and we prompt the user, says all sides are equal length, how many sides in your polygon? And so we get a number, and that's stored in this variable called sides. And then if sides is less than 3, we print an error. Polygon must have 3 or more sides. That look familiar? That's what we had on the flow chart, right? Okay. So otherwise, else, if it's greater than 5, print, I don't know what that's called. Again, from the flow chart, right? Okay. So if neither of these 2 conditions up here are true, then the program flow falls down here to line number 8 that says else. It's going to print this line that says a polygon with whatever number of sides the user keyed in, equal length sides, is called A, and it's going to leave it hanging there. And then if the sides is equal to 3, it'll print triangle. If it's equal to 4, it'll print square. If it's equal to 5, it'll print pentagon, okay? Understand the flow of this, how it's going to work? Let me show you it working. Okay. Let's see, how do I do this? I think I have to do... Oh, darn it. Okay. I had this worked out. Oh, I know how to do it. I'm sorry. There it is. It's actually up there, isn't it? Okay. All I got to do is figure out how to drive that. Oh, I'm stuck. I can't get to that very easily. Yes, I could. But it won't because it's saying, ha, 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 ha. You're a stupid human. Well, would you take my word for it that it actually does work the way we advertise? And that actually is good because it gets us down the road faster. Okay, so my program, it works, and I tested. The only thing I was going to show you is that if on the input, when I'm prompted to enter the number of sides, if I put in a non-numeric value, like the letter A or the letter X or an exclamation mark, then my program crashes and says, ooh, unexpected input. Don't know what to do with that. It's not a number, so I can't do any of your comparisons, right? I'll hold on to that thought because I'm going to have some update for you on that. Okay, so why is AI a different kind of software than the type I just got done describing? So again, it's declarative and it focuses on the what. And so instead of explicitly programming the steps to solve a problem, it's trained to learn from the data and make inferences based on patterns and examples. It learns to represent knowledge and to make decisions based on that knowledge. So learning is based on pattern recognition. Isn't that how we learn? My daughter spent some time in Ghana right after she graduated college. And she was down there with a group called Women in Progress. She was helping the local ladies learn how to run their businesses. They're incredible seamstresses. So she brought like a Sears catalog and a JCPenney catalog. And I said, well, why are you bringing these catalogs? She says, because when they crave pictures of women's dresses, because if they can see a picture of it, they can make it. Isn't that cool? So anyway, she's down there doing this. And as she's milling about smartly in the village one day, she notices this little baby with a great big machete. Little baby, probably a year and a half old, with a machete, carrying around the machete, dragging it and hitting things like, you know. And Ashley says, oh my goodness, take that machete away from that baby. And the baby's mother said, why? She said, because the baby's going to cut its finger off. And the mom said, well then, it will learn not to do that again, won't it? That's called the school of hard knocks, right? But that's experiential learning, right? We see patterns, and then once we have an idea for how a pattern works, we can see new information and we can apply that pattern, and that's called learning, right? Okay, so, well, that's the same thing that happens with artificial intelligence. Now, a biological brain learns through repeated pattern recognition. So here's a key concept. AI's purpose is to process data in a non-linear fashion and find the correct answer. Okay, so what does that mean? AI's capability to learn is its ability to fit curves to nonlinear data. And I'm going to talk about linear versus nonlinear data in just a second. So let's see how AI actually does this. How many of you loved math when you were in high school? Okay, we got a few. We're going to do a very quick review of something called functions, okay? A function is simply something that takes an input and gives you a response, okay? It's kind of like if Jerry were to come up here and hit me on the side of the jaw really hard, I would then fall down. I'd be out cold. That'd be my response, right? So the function of hitting me might put me on the deck, okay? But in a more benign fashion, if you look at the function on the left called the identity function, it's a very simple straight line. If the input value is, for example, -1 here on the x-axis, by the way, Cartesian coordinates, the x-axis is always the horizontal and the y-axis is the vertical in the Cartesian coordinate system, okay? So if the input of x is equal to 1, then we look up to where that intersects the y-axis and we find out that the value of y is equal to 1. That's the identity function. Whatever the input is, that's the output. Okay, that's simple enough. Well, this is a little different. Y equals x squared. What happens when you square a negative number? -1 times -1. How much? Anybody remember? Yeah, everything's positive. You don't get negative numbers when you square, right? So a -1 times -1 is equal to +1. So if we look up the y-axis right there, right above the 1, that's the answer. That's the output of that function, right? The square root looks like this. As you take the square root of x, you get a curve that kind of looks like this, and it gradually just keeps on going up all the way up there, okay? Those are functions. The reason I'm sharing that with you is now I'm going to show you linear functions, okay? The first one that we saw on the previous slide, the one on the left, was a linear function, okay? Linear functions are very easy. You find your x value over here, and you read your y value off the chart. Find your x value here, get your y value. Get your x value out here, your y value is down there, okay? Those are linear functions. Linear data processing does not need neural networks, okay? It's very simple. And I'm going to give you an example here in a second. So let's give you a real-world example of a linear function, okay? Let me propose that if your car is in good working order, the harder you push on your accelerator, the faster you go. Fair enough? Okay, so I have how hard I'm pushing on the accelerator down here. That's my x input, and I look up here to read my speed. Very simple, okay? If I'm not pushing at all on the gas pedal, what's my speed? 0. I mean, if I were stationary to begin with, I'm not going anywhere, right? Okay, so that's an example of a linear function. It just turns out that in the real world, not a lot of things adhere to linear function results, okay? Some do, but not a lot. So instead of linear functions, what you're seeing on the screen now are what's called non-linear functions. It simply means that they have some kind of a shape to them, right? This is called the sigmoid function right here, and so on and so forth. So let me give you an example of a nonlinear function that I'm sure we can all relate to. This is a graph showing 5 plants, each one the same type of plant, given different amounts of water every day over an extended period of time, okay? Guess what happened to the plant that got 0 milliliters of water? It didn't grow, did it? Duh, okay? And what happens when we give it 2 milliliters of water every day? Oh, it does better, right? And 3 does better than that. 4 does really well, right? But look what happens when you cross a threshold. Someplace between here and here, the plant starts to not do so well, right? Have we all seen that with the recent rain that we had? I had to take my wife's plants out of her pool. We have these little kiddie pools. She keeps the plants in there to capture whatever little water was coming down. They were floating, and they looked a little pale, a little yellow. So here's an example. Now, can we fit the data here with a linear function? Will a single line fit all that data to let us just look up the value here and predict what the value is? No, there's no single line that does that because it's oddly shaped. Well, it turns out that in the real world, most things are oddly shaped. Like here's just a collection of data. It's random data, but it has something to do with something. And you can see here that, well, that kind of looks like there might be a line that goes through the middle of all those dots that kind of describes the behavior, would you say? Okay. But over here, what about this? That looks more exponential to me, right? The further we move away from the origin, the greater the rate of increase becomes. That's an exponential function, right? And yet this looks kind of like our plant function, right? A little upside down. If you shifted that over to there, and kind of, it'd kind of look a little bit more like that. So this is what actually happens, is we actually, let me just give you this one. This is what it looks like when you kind of fill that in with what the function might be. Is this making sense? Okay, so what I'm trying to show you is that the shape of the function can help you determine what the expected outcome is going to be. And this is what artificial intelligence actually uses. So let me tell you a little bit more. Is everybody with me so far? So far, so good? Okay, you hanging on by your thumbnails there? Or no? Good. Okay, so now here comes an interesting question. What do you do if you have data that looks like this? What do you do with this? I mean, okay, so it kind of goes up, and then it starts coming right back down to 0, and then it goes up again, and then it comes back down to 0. So there's this little window between these two dots where you get a good, strong signal, good positive result. How do you graph that with a linear function or even a nonlinear function? Can a single nonlinear function do that? The answer is no. There is no nonlinear function that will graph that data for you. But it's the essence of how machines learn, so we have to graph it. So how do we do that? By the way, here's what the graph would look like. So if I wanted to predict, by the way, it had to do with a dosage of medication that was given. And if the dosage was 0, the result was not good. But if the dosage was someplace up in this range on the x-axis, then it was a very good, effective dosage. And then it came back down to 0 if you got to this level of dosage. And then for some reason in here, it pops back up again. But then it comes back down and it goes back up. Very difficult. Let's just call that the squiggle, okay? Because that's a good name for it. So if we can figure out how to map a squiggle, then we can create something that is predictive in nature, that says, aha, I see this input, I've got my squiggle. Where's the input on the x-axis? It's right there. Well, if I go straight up from there, that's my expected value right there. I can pull it right off the squiggle. Okay, that's the key. So the answer is the way you get that, the way you get to a squiggle on complex real-world data is you use a neural network. Okay, so this is the picture of a normal brain. The next slide is going to have a picture of my brain, which is much simpler than this one. So here's a whole bunch of neurons, okay? The cell, if you remember from high school biology, neurons have this kind of cluster here at one end, and it has this thing called an axon that transmits, and it's got outputs down here, and its inputs are up here. These are called dendrites, and these are called buttons. and they're all connected to each other, and this is the essence of how the biology inside our brain actually works, okay? Now here's a picture of my brain. Remember those videos, here's your brain on drugs? Well, here's my brain. I've got exactly 1.5 neurons in there, and every now and then, one of them fires. Most of the time, it makes a misfire, but sometimes it gets it right, okay? So these are the various parts that I mentioned before. The dendrites are out here. These are the inputs to the neurons, and this is the axon that carries the electrical signal down here to the terminal buttons, which connect then to another set of dendrites, or multiple dendrites, right? So one of these can connect to multiple neurons on the other side, okay? So that's biology. Now, we've all seen this before, right? Like way back. I mean, even art, when you were a kid, they had pictures like this in school, didn't they? No? Oh, that was before Gutenberg, right? I'm sorry. Art, you're such a good sport. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at side-by-side comparison of a biological neuron and an artificial neuron, okay? These are the biologics over here, and this is the artificial one. And basically, you're going to see this in a diagram coming up, but this would be considered a neuron in an artificial neural network. So it has inputs to it, all of the inputs from whatever the source sensor would be, and it has these things called weights assigned to it, and then it performs a function on all of the values. So it takes this input, multiplies it times the weight, and it sums it with this input multiplied the weight times the weight, and this input multiplied times the weight, and it stores that value right there, right? And that's kind of what's represented right here. And then it has what's called a transfer function. Based on the value, it decides an output signal, and that goes to the next neuron, just like in the brain, okay? Now, I'm going to get a little bit more into detail without trying to overwhelm you with math, okay? But look at it this way. Let's say that these were just three, let's say like a stoplight, okay? And the color, you got green, yellow, and red, just as an example of 3 inputs, okay? So the weight of this input is determined by the multiplier, the W1. The weight of this input is determined by this W2, which can be different than W1 and is in a neural network, okay? And so all of these things get summed together. That's what the summation sigma symbol means. It means sum all those together and then add, every neuron has a unique bias. That's just a digital offset, okay? It's a number. And then it has what's called an activation function. Well, this is what a neural network would look like, a very simple neural network with an input layer on the left, an output layer on the right, and there's something called the hidden layer or layers in the middle, okay? And what happens here, notice a couple of things. Every input is connected to every one of these neurons in the hidden layer, okay? So each input will affect one of these depending on its values of W and bias, okay? And this is where the magic of all this starts to play. And then it performs a function, and the idea is to get the right output to light up based on the input. And the way this happens is by training the neural network. And I'm going to get into that in just a second. But it's not even necessary to make a prediction when you design a neural network as to what all of these W's and biases need to be. You don't even have to, just assign random numbers to it. It'll figure it out when you train it. That's important to understand, really important to understand. This means that artificial neural networks are going to become a way for you to solve some of your real-world issues. In some programming, something that's going to get delivered to you in 5 to 10 years, you're going to get a product that's going to use artificial neural networks that you create without even knowing that you're creating them. And the way it's going to work is it's going to ask you to train it. Show me a picture of your dog. By the way, any of you have Apple products? Have an iPhone? It identifies faces, doesn't it? You identify a face once, and it knows that face in all your other pictures, right? Okay, guess what? That sort of logic is at work there, okay? Here is a slightly more complicated neural network, but still child's play for big computers, right? But notice all of the different hidden layers in here. As the number of input variables goes up and its effect on the output is more pronounced, the number of layers in the hidden layer also goes up, okay? Is that kind of intuitive? Because again, what's it trying to do? It's trying to fit a curve to some nonlinear data, and it needs this type of a structure to do it. Okay, so here's our key takeaway. By utilizing neural networks or other advanced techniques, AI models can approximate complex nonlinear functions, enabling them to fit curves and capture intricate patterns that may exist in the data. Patterns that we humans may not even understand or see. Have you all heard about the advances in medicine that artificial intelligence is making as or better accurate diagnoses of problems by looking at the MRIs? It can see things that human radiologists just don't see. They miss it. But well, there's a whole lot of reasons as to because, but it's just fascinating what's happening. So this flexibility that I shared with you, the W's and the biases and the transfer functions, or the activation functions, I'm sorry, this flexibility allows AI models to handle a wide range of problems, such as image and speech recognition, natural language processing, financial modeling, and many other applications. It's that magic. It's not procedural. Remember, again, it's not focusing on the how, it's focusing on the what. Train me with data. Give me some data and tell me what the expected output is, and I will learn those relationships. I'll make my green squiggles so that I can predict those outputs, okay? Now here's something that I stumbled across in my research that I just have to take a second and share with you. This is a side-by-side photograph of a neuron on the left and the simulated galaxy cluster in our universe that are connected by filaments. If you were at any of my previous presentations, you know that the filaments that connect the universe, the galaxies, just fascinating. So let me run down a few of the similarities. The human cerebellum has about 69 billion neurons, yet the observable cosmic web contains about 100 billion galaxies. 69 billion versus 100 billion. Similar kind of numbers. Both systems are arranged in well-defined networks with nodes, neurons in the brain, and galaxies in the universe, connected via filaments. Both neurons and galaxies have a typical scale radius that's only a fraction of the length of the filaments, and the flow of information and energy between nodes is only around 25% of the mass and energy content of each system. Similarity, again, between neurons and the way our universe is constructed. In addition, there are similarities between the composition of the brain and the composition of the universe. The brain is about 77% water. The universe is about 72% dark energy. Both of these are apparently passive materials that permeate their respective system and play only an indirect role in their internal structures. Isn't that interesting? I just had to share that with you. Okay, so you may also, as you learn about artificial intelligence, come across a term called artificial general intelligence, AGI. And AGI is AI that's capable of learning and generalizing across many unrelated domains, many different disciplines, okay? In other words, the ability of a machine to perform any task that can be done by a human. That is artificial general intelligence. And this is what most folks are kind of concerned about. Let's talk a little bit about today's capabilities with artificial intelligence. We mentioned earlier the medical diagnoses, how incredibly accurate and insightful some of these are that go beyond what human radiologists can see. Here's an interesting one. This is a 12-row see and spray robot that targets weeds only to receive an herbicide. It reduces herbicides needed by 95%. So imagine it's got vision in there, and it knows the crop versus everything else, and if it's in everything else, it zaps it with an herbicide and takes it out surgically instead of spraying the entire field and getting all these toxins on the produce. It's kind of cool. So that's a good thing, right? So here's a little machine that is from a company called Bossa Nova Robotics that autonomously works its way through a supermarket and takes an inventory. I personally can't see that that's more efficient today than having a person do it, but okay. There must be a market because they make and sell these machines, right? So that's coming. Jordan Peterson suggests that ChatGPT-4 is a Gutenberg press level invention. I would pay close attention to that. We know what happened when the Gutenberg press was created, right? All of a sudden there were Bibles everywhere. People could read, they could have their own copy instead of getting one of the heavily labored manuscript translations, right, from one of the scribes. So GPT-4, ChatGPT-4 is based on the large language model. What that means is that it digests a huge corpus of information and it discovers the relationship between the words. I was mentioning before the meeting started that there was a language that's spoken someplace in the Philippines, a very remote language that was not very common, and the artificial intelligence engine was asked to converse in it, and it didn't know the language. So it spent the morning and it learned it, and then in the afternoon it had a detailed conversation with folks who spoke that language. So in the morning it learned a complete language, right? It's trained on the analysis of a huge corpus of written text and speech. Oops, sorry. I think, okay, yeah, so, I'm sorry, I keep blowing. There, and it can do many diverse and amazing things already, and I'm going to share some of those things with you. Here was my command to ChatGPT-4 about 4 or 5 days ago. It said, write a Python program that identifies 3, 4, and 5-sided polygons, each with equal length sides, based on the number of sides input by the user. Handle cases where number of sides is less than 3, and produce an error message. Also handle invalid input. So I told it to handle 3, 4, and 5-sided, no more. And so 2 seconds later, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, you didn't see that while I was reading it. 2 seconds later, it produced this program, which is very similar to my program, only I had to spend all that time typing it, and it just banged it out. And by the way, this program is better than my program because it actually handles the unexpected input that I mentioned earlier. So if I type a letter A or a letter S or an exclamation mark, this program says, that's not a number, give me a number. I asked you for a number, right, for the number of sides. And so this program, of course, this program would run if I had the ability to show it to you. And maybe later, if you want to see it, I'll be happy to do that. So then, oh, by the way, the last line on this screen, it says, evaluate your program for efficiency. I'm telling ChatGPT-4 to evaluate its own work for efficiency. Okay, look what it said. The program I provided for identifying polygons with equal side lengths based on the number of sides entered by the user is relatively efficient. However, there are a few areas where you can consider improvements. Input validation. The current program handles invalid input by catching a value error and spitting out an error message. I'll save you the rest of it. Error handling. The program provides an error message if the number of sides entered is less than 3. While this is a good practice, it would be more informative to include the actual input value that triggered the error in the error message. So all it's saying is, add something like, you told me 2 sides. There is no such thing as a 2-sided polygon. That's all that's saying, right? And then it goes on. But think about this for a minute. I asked it to write me a program, and then I asked it to evaluate its work. This reminds me of the story of the guy that worked at Twitter, and he literally took a vacation while he was at work for about a week. And on Friday afternoon, he asked ChatGPT-4, said, tell me what I should have done this week for work, and oh, by the way, write the software that I should have wrote. And it did, in about a minute. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So, here's, I had fun with this. I asked it, write a 2-paragraph analysis of how the Old Testament predicts the coming Messiah, the number of specific prophecies about him, and how Jesus fulfilled the prophecies. Calculate the odds that Jesus is not the Messiah per the prophecies. That's what I put in. I'm just banging in regular English language. I'm not writing any program to do this, right? Look at what it said. The Old Testament contains numerous prophecies to predict the coming of a Messiah, a figure who would bring salvation, establish God's kingdom, and fulfill God's promises to his people. These prophecies are found in various books, including Genesis, Isaiah, Micah, and Psalms. The number of specific prophecies about the Messiah varies depending on different interpretations, but conservative estimates suggest around 60 to 70 significant prophecies. These prophecies cover various aspects of the Messiah's birth, lineage, ministry, suffering, death, and resurrection. Second paragraph. Jesus of Nazareth, believed by Christians to be the fulfillment of these messianic prophecies, remarkably matches the predictions. He was born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2, from the lineage of David, 2 Samuel 7:12 through 13, performed miracles, Isaiah 35, verses 5 through 6, entered Jerusalem on a donkey, Zechariah 9:9, was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, Zechariah 11:12 through 13, crucified alongside criminals, Isaiah 53:12, and rose from the dead on the third day, Psalm 16:10. The odds of all these prophecies being fulfilled in one person by mere chance are astronomically low. Some scholars have attempted to calculate the probability of these prophecies coming true in a single individual and have arrived at figures like 1 in 10 to the 17th. That's a 1 with 17 zeros after it. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. Or even lower, making it highly unlikely that Jesus is not the promised Messiah. That's kind of interesting. That came out of a computer who analyzes texts and builds relationships in the texts. What are those odds again? Okay, not 1 in 100. Sorry. Oh, wait. What's going on here? Not 1 in 100, not 1 in 10,000, not 1 in a trillion, but 1 in 100,000 trillion that Jesus is not the Messiah. That's just math coming out of a computer. Okay, so we're on the topic of what are today's AI capabilities. Watch this, sports fans. Do we have sound? Computer sound?
How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Glad to hear. What is your name?
I'm Chris.
Chris.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Are you okay if I shoot a video of you?
Absolutely.
So, Alka, what are you?
I'm the humanoid robot. I am designed as a research platform for human-robot interaction.
How many fingers am I holding up?
You are holding up 4 fingers. And I like your sweatshirt.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Humans love compliments.
Pretty impressive, pretty scary too, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay, now watch this one. I think it's going to play.
But what happens when you add artificial intelligence to the mix and make robots more human? Introducing Atlas. This robot, built by Boston Dynamics, has athletic intelligence that can actually do parkour. It's 5 feet tall, weighs 86 kilos, is battery-powered, and works on a hydraulic system. So how does Atlas run a parkour course? It was designed with 18 degrees of freedom of movement. And to help it navigate a parkour course, it uses RGB cameras with depth sensors. These sensors feed data into a control system with 3 computers where basically perception is converted into action. So this robot can not only get from point A to point B, but it can also correct its footsteps along the way and maintain balance. By having Atlas run a parkour course, its engineers are able to identify problems and extend its capabilities. But why was it built in the first place?
The work that we're doing now, I view as really just foundation building. We're building the core capabilities that we think any useful robot will need. And in doing so, we're really defining the next set of challenges that we're going to be working on over the next 2 to 5 years.
Atlas's athletic abilities are impressive, but this next robot doesn't just walk and jump.
Justin, how'd you like to meet one of them on the battlefield? You're going to love this one.
Forgot my tools again.
off.
What do you think? Pretty impressive, huh? That's not an animation, that's real. And you can't, trust me, you can't write software to do that in the conventional sense. Notice how when he pushed the box off the edge, it had to then figure out where is the box so I can jump on it and land on it safely, right? If it was just sitting there, maybe someone could have programmed that in, right, for distance, but no, it found it. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the scary side of all this if you haven't been piqued a little bit already. So what is this thing called the AI singularity? It's when AI machines will replicate themselves, making better AI machines than themselves without the aid of humans. Okay? Yeah, it's Terminator level stuff is what we're talking about. Many scientists believe that once this happens, AI will be unrestrained and unstoppable. In addition, many of them believe that artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence almost instantly when that happens. Yeah, like out of control. Right, exactly. So, the tricky thing about the AI singularity and why it borrows terminology from black hole physics is that it's enormously difficult to predict where it begins and nearly impossible to know what's beyond this technological event horizon. So it borrows these terminologies from black holes. You know about black holes, right, where the gravity is so great that nothing can escape it, not even light itself. It gets sucked into the hole, right? And so that point, if you're traveling towards a black hole, there's a point called the event horizon. And if you cross that event horizon, you're gone. You're going in the hole. There's no way to get out, right? So it talks about this event horizon in relation to the AI singularity, which, by the way, a black hole is also a mathematical and physical singularity, where all of its matter is compressed into an infinitesimally small spot. And that's what gives it such amazingly high gravity. So it uses this black hole terminology because the problem is we can't see what's on the other side of the event horizon, and we can't see what's on the other side of the AI singularity event horizon, right? We can't predict it, right? We just can't predict it. So that's why there are like a lot of people, engineers, lead engineers. Did you hear about Geoffrey Hinton, who quit his job at Google? He was Google's AI #1 guy, and he quit his job recently. And he signed a letter that's addressed to world leaders that says we need to put a moratorium on AI development for 6 months until we get our arms around how to prevent this from getting out of control, right? Oh, that's already happened. Well, I know, and it's capturing a lot of people's attention. Okay, so I took this quote that I just read you from Popular Mechanics, January 23rd of this year. So here are a couple of headlines and the sources. I want to give full credit to the sources that I got these from. In Scientific American online, here's why AI might be extremely dangerous, whether it's conscious or not. Now, we can talk about what is consciousness, but the most agreed upon definition of consciousness is when something realizes that it exists. It can think about thinking. It can think about itself, okay? Geoffrey Hinton, by the way, said the idea that this stuff could actually get smarter than people, I thought it was way off. Obviously, I no longer think that. And he's one of the lead developers, right? Hinton is not the only one worried. A 2023 survey of AI experts found that 36% fear that AI development may result in nuclear-level catastrophe. Almost 28,000 people have signed this open letter written by the Future of Life Institute, including Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, Elon Musk, and the CEOs of several AI companies, and many other prominent technologists asking for a 6-month pause. So if these folks are worried, we ought to be at least concerned, okay, and not just be oblivious to what's going on. I mentioned earlier that AI is just as good at diagnosing illnesses as humans. They did a systemic review and a meta-analysis of its kind that, the first of its kind that finds that artificial intelligence is just as good at diagnosing a disease based on a medical image as healthcare professionals. Anybody in the room a doctor? Okay, you don't have to worry about your job then. I'm sorry? That's right, you are. Dr. Porter back there. But thankfully, you're retired. Now, it does mention that there are more high-quality studies that are coming. But in a recent article of the New England Journal of Medicine, Isaac Cohane, head of the Harvard Medical School's Department of Biometric Informatics, and his co-authors say that AI will indeed make it possible to bring all medical knowledge to bear in service of any case. Think of the situation that we've had all of our lives, right? If you've got something seriously wrong with you, what's the first thing that you or your parents wanted to go do? Let's go find the very best expert we can find, right? But think about this now. With artificial intelligence, having access to all of the medical records, all the medical data, let's just say data, put privacy issues aside for just a minute. But imagine artificial intelligence having access to all of the x-rays and MRIs and CAT scans of the human body and the diagnoses that were made from those sources, right? And now a person walks in with something, they take a CAT scan or they take a MRI, and AI, within a few moments, identifies exactly what's going on with that person. Even if the person that brought you in the room was a receptionist with no medical training whatsoever. They just got you hooked up to the AI info analysis, right? Think about that. That's pretty cool, right? So there's tremendous promise in this technology. Let's see. So new research finds that causal machine learning models are not only more accurate than previous AI-based symptoms checkers for patient diagnosis, but in many cases can now exceed the diagnosis accuracy of human doctors. That's mainly due to the methods used, which allow for more outside-the-box creativity in diagnosis and even more improved accuracy for more complex patient illness. So when somebody's got something really strange going on, it can figure out all of the different levels of complexity. Why? Because it can fit all those crazy green squiggles to the data curves and say, look what's happening here, and connect the dots for us. Whereas a human might not have seen all those relationships, right? Okay, so Tesla cars, they're pretty cool, right? These things have multiple sensors, including GPS, cameras, ultrasonic sensors, LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging. So you're looking at this picture of a Tesla and you're thinking, that's a pretty cool car, right? Well, look at this next picture and what do you see? Those are all Teslas. I see a fleet of robots. Now, here's something interesting about this stuff, right? Tesla's cars are all tied into a network, right? So let's just hypothetically say that a Tesla goes over a brand new pothole in a major thoroughfare, and the suspension goes, right? And it says, it's got a GPS location for where that pothole is. It transmits it up through the net so that the servers know the location of that pothole. It knows the severity of how bad that pothole is by how much it affected its suspension, because it's sensing all of this stuff, right? The next Tesla that goes over that pothole, right before it gets to the pothole, pre-adjusts its suspension to make it ride a little bit smoother. And it registers the improvement, sends it up to the server. The third Tesla that goes over that pothole goes over it almost glass smooth because the first and the second one found it and gave it data, and it learned how to adapt the suspension so that the human wouldn't. Now, here's the scary part about all of this. What I just described is really cool, especially if you're in the fourth, fifth, or sixth Tesla going over that pothole, right? But here's the problem, right? When one Tesla robot learns something, they all learn something. Think about our models of learning. Like, are there any tradesmen in the audience tonight? Okay. How long? What's your trade? Drywall. Okay. Okay. Do they have like plumbers? Do they have a journeyman? And they have all that? Okay. How long? What was the first phase called when you were first hired on and learned? Apprenticeship. How long was your apprenticeship? 2 years. And then journeyman? After 4 years. And then what's beyond journeyman? You get your license, okay? So 2 years plus 4 years, that's 6 years. How many people got trained in that event? Him, right? When artificial intelligence learns something, they all learn it simultaneously. Do you see how this is exponential in nature? How the rate of learning is unlike anything that we've ever experienced on the surface of this planet, right? Well, except for one person. They already knew everything coming in, but that's a different story. Okay, so this was from Wired magazine, the 7th of September of 21. But Tesla also gathers more training data than other car companies. Each of the more than 1 million Teslas on the road sends back to the company the video feeds from its 8 cameras. Tesla says it employs 1,000 people to label those images. Now, what is labeling? Here's an image, and a human says, this is a cat, this is a human, this is a fire hydrant, this is another car, this is a bus, that's a bridge. That's what labeling is. You take the picture, and the human identifies the objects and points them out to the computer so that it can use back propagation through the artificial neural network to learn what all those things are and what they look like. So the next time it sees one, it knows what it's looking at. Noting cars, trucks, traffic signs, lane markings, and other features in the labeling to help train the large transformer. At the August event, Tesla also said it can automatically select which images to prioritize in labeling to make the process even more efficient. So you see, it's the training of these artificial neural networks that is everything. Everything is in the training. By the way, if you train it poorly, you're going to get garbage in, garbage out, right? Okay, so what should we be concerned about? Jordan Peterson, love that guy. We are primitive children with the tools of gods. It's kind of like, what did Oppenheimer say when he blew up the first atomic bombs? Anybody remember? Well, he was concerned. He was very concerned, right? The power of the atom was an awesome force that had never been seen before. AI-based computers replacing humans in the workforce is another concern. That's already happening. You know, and I don't want to get political in any way, but you know, when minimum wage standards are raised to $15 an hour, what's the employer going to do? He's going to find a way to get a computer to do the job that a human was doing previously, right? That's right. Can you imagine 30 years ago, self-checkout? No, not 30 years ago. Okay, so AI-based computers replacing humans in the workforce is a concern. And the last one is the possibility that post-singularity machines may decide Earth's carbon units, using a Star Trek term, are an infection on the planet. That would be a bad thing. That would be like crossing the beams. You don't want to cross the beams because it's a bad thing, right? Okay. So, are you concerned? Okay. Do you think you know a little bit more about artificial intelligence and kind of, it's not just another computer software technique, it's really radically different than anything we've ever seen before, and it's super powerful in its capability. Now, I'm not an expert on the topic. I have just spent the last month and a half or so reading up on it and studying it and trying to explain it, but I would be happy to take any questions that you might have, but we have to do this for the sake of the recording. I have to give you the microphone, so don't start talking until you've got the microphone in your hands.
Oh, one thing is the speed of AI. Like the 50 supersonic missiles that Iran sold to Russia and they shot at Ukraine, they didn't think that the missile defense system could stop them. But the missile defense system has AI and immediately shot almost all of them but one of them down.
Yeah.
Because it thinks so fast.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of, this is how, for all of you who might know Jim LaRose, he's a Florida Highway Patrol officer. He said one of the things that he had read was, imagine an AI weapon system with an automatic rifle as part of its equipment and a bad guy shooting at it, right? The AI system will not only shoot the bullet at where the guy is, he'll shoot the bullet at the 50 most likely places where the guy is likely to be in the next 3 to 5 milliseconds. And boom, 50 bullets go out. The guy can't move. There's no place the guy can run to be safe, to save himself. Think about that. We can't even fathom that as humans. We just can't pull the trigger that fast, right? Maybe unless you have a Dillon arrow. You know. Yes?
Before we came, we went on YouTube and saw the very parts of the video you were showing. Mm-hmm. And it actually had one of the AI people, humanoids, say that they would take over the humans. Uh-huh. How can that be that it said that?
Well, because it has figured out that there's a possibility that it could do that, right? Because remember, it studies our language, it learns the language, it learns the relationship between words, and if you give it a hypothetical like, What would happen, you could go to Chat, we could do it, if anybody wants to stay for a little bit, I'd be happy to fire up ChatGPT and show you this thing in action. It's amazing. But we could say, what would happen if humans decided to shut down all of the artificial intelligence servers and see what it says? Right now, if it's not self-aware, it might say, well, we just go offline and you can't use us. But if it is self-aware, and heaven forbid, if it ever gets this notion that it wants to preserve itself at all costs, then it might say, we might have to take out the humans. Yes, yeah. Yeah, it is scary that it said that.
Gary, I think we're probably all really impressed with how the government handled the science involving the pandemic.
I know I was.
And so I just wonder if you have any knowledge as to the people who are in charge of the programs for our nuclear ballistic missiles and that sort of thing, our weapons system. Who does that?
You mean, has that been turned over to Skynet yet?
I'm asking you.
I don't have, I separated from the service in 1982, so my information would be extremely dated, and it predates the AI stuff. In fact, I actually bid on a contract, government contract, back in '83 to get involved in artificial network development back before the topic was even widely thought about. And part of the issue was back then, there's a massive amount of computing power that's needed to do this. There's a massive amount of data storage that's needed to do this. And we're kind of like at the nexus where all of these things come together and enable this thing called artificial intelligence for real, right? Because before the internet, the case I gave you with Tesla, that couldn't happen. The car would be maybe self-driving, but it'd find the pothole and it might remember it the next time, but it's not passing it up to some server via the internet to get stored so all the cars can know that, right? So you can see how big data and the internet and infrastructure had to be in place in order for us to be where we are today. Yes, ma'am. Microphone. Yep.
Well,
go ahead.
Are the programmers, if you know, are they government employees for the weapon system, or do they belong to the? Are they employees of the contractors? Who develops our software, if you know?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a military-industrial complex, right? The Air Force.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is scary, right? What did Eisenhower warn us about? The military-industrial complex. As you know, software is developed for the government by government employees and by private contractors, right? So there's a conglomeration of people involved in this. Plus, in addition to that that's going on, then there's also private enterprise that's developing artificial intelligence applications, some of them hoping to get into that business, and others not wanting anything to do with that business, but developing it for other reasons, right? So there's a whole lot of folks developing AI capability right now. And who's actually doing the weapon system stuff? It's broadband, and it's worldwide. China's doing it, Europe's doing it, we're doing it. Anybody with a budget's doing it, right? Conrad, you have a question?
In a race now to say they say whichever country gets our hang on first is going to be.
Yeah, it's kind of like a race. Ronnie's pointing out it's a race. Whoever gets it first is going to be the lucky winner. There you go, Conrad.
I was just going to say that your question about the nuclear weapon systems and stuff like that, I'm an expert in that. I spent 30 years developing and being part of that program. There's nothing to be concerned at this point. If you want to talk offline, we can.
Good answer, Conrad. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I have one more question that's concerning to me regarding, they asked if Jesus was the Messiah, and it had all the biblical right stuff until you got to the bottom where it said 1 in 100,000 trillion that Jesus isn't the Messiah.
Right.
So how can we say the AI is more superior to our knowledge? And can you explain this?
I'm sorry, so I need to ask you a couple of clarifying questions.
Okay.
So it's making that mathematical prediction based on the number of what it considers significant prophecies. It used 60 to 70 significant prophecies. I have read that there are some 363 or so prophecies about the Messiah in all of Scripture, right? So they're using 60 to 70, and they come up with a denominator that is 100 trillion in size. 100,000 trillion in size, that's right. That's a very, very small number. I mean, it's essentially zero. It's one, okay, so what's 1/100th of a dollar? It's a penny, right? What's a tenth of a penny? You need 10 of those to make a penny, right? That's only 4 zeros. This is 1 followed by 17 zeros in the denominator. It's essentially zero probability, according to the ChatGPT-4, that Jesus was not the Messiah.
Are we supposed to believe that?
No, I'm just saying if you apply math to the probability, I mean, we all make inferences based on the data, right? Right? I mean, I personally went through a pretty extended period of time seeking to find out if Jesus really was who he said he was. You know, I spent a lot of time. I mean, this was not some kind of a, snap thing for me. I spent years trying to assess whether he really was who he said he was. And
what was your conclusion?
My conclusion was he absolutely is. Okay. And he is the Messiah, right? That's my conclusion. And by the way,
that's my conclusion too.
Yeah,
that's why I was
but
perplexed.
but no, don't be perplexed by that. What the machine is telling you is that it's essentially a zero probability that he's not the Messiah. Zero. That number is so infinitesimally small. It's essentially zero. Yeah, it's essentially zero. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yes, sir. John?
Well, we're kind of worried about what humans can do with this technology. What if it develops with self-awareness, self-preservation?
Yeah.
And so it writes a program how to set up a power station. And it just slips in a way that it can get into that power station without human assistance. Well, it could be terrible.
Yeah, that's kind of the singularity level concern that Elon Musk has. One of the things I read in my research, by the way, was Elon Musk had made mention that one of his ideas, right, is that perhaps we should put some orbiting missile systems in outer space, focus down on the server farms where these big AI databases and servers are sitting, and if anything goes wrong, hit the button, take those things off the planet, because that's about what it would take. Yeah, exactly. Hang on a second, Gary.
But I would just say if you did that, then what if they took over the ability to connect to those rockets and then face them towards, something else?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's countermeasure, measure, countermeasure, countermeasure, measure. Exactly. Yeah, it's, and that's why the 6-month moratorium, right? Let's take time out and figure out how we're going to deal with this. Gary?
I just read an article about the Air Force programming a drone to go after military targets, and it would get points for every military target it took out. But the human had to say yes or no. So the drone figured out to take out the human because it was preventing it from getting points. So then they reprogrammed it and they said, well, no, you're not allowed to go after the human. So they started the program again and the drone went after the radio antennas. So the human couldn't control. Yes, you get the idea?
Yeah, it keeps going.
Right.
Measure, countermeasure, measure.
When it was first talked about, it came out that it was an actual demonstration and they killed the drone operators. The Air Force had to back down about that. No, that didn't happen. It was just a computer simulation. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, right. These are all concerns. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions? Justin?
Yes, we were just talking about it over here. Yeah, so obviously they put the letter out, but has any major country signed on to that letter at this point, which we assume no?
Well, rest assured, here in the United States, we have it handled. Our vice president is the AI czar.
Thought you said we weren't getting political, but
I just simply said we've got it handled.
No, I feel you. So if no major country has signed on to that, then we're just moving on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, so there's the issue of countries signing on and what that means. Think about the Kyoto agreements just for a little bit. What does all that mean, right? In reality, countries can sign on, but do they really do anything about it? That's another issue. And then even if countries sign on, how does that keep an individual entrepreneur from developing the next greatest Skynet in his basement? Yes, ma'am.
Is there some kind of safeguard built in to, like, if somebody, like, say, from Iran gets a hold of it and it can program it to take out Israel or the United States Christians? Is there any way, or is that thing just kind of
Are you talking about weapon systems or artificial intelligence in general?
artificial intelligence in general?
It would depend on the system, the artificial intelligence system.
Could somebody rig it? And I
Sure.
don't know, but the
Sure.
brain, you know.
One thing software engineers love to do is rig up backdoors to their software.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, you know, it's the human condition. We are fundamentally flawed. Do you think we're going to handle this one very well? Look what's
Satan
happened to
would
the
love it.
internet. You know all this not to be gross, but you know all this technology that we have with YouTube today, and you know especially this VR technology. You know the three-dimensional stuff. Have you seen this? You put on the goggles, and now you're in a three-dimensional world, right? You know where all that stuff came from? The porn industry. The porn industry pioneered all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So, do you think we're going to do well with this AI stuff? Is there any reason to believe that we're not at risk? I don't know.